Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this workshop. I think we have some really fantastic information that's going to be shared with everyone. But first, I wanted to hand it off to Bob Smart. He's going to welcome everyone to this presentation.
Thanks, Stacy. Welcome. I'm so glad to see a full Zoom screen for a change. Thank you for your interest in international research. Today, we'll hear from our faculty colleagues, Rachel Powers, Jeff Kelly Lowenstein, and Richard Lord about their experiences navigating international research and maintaining international collaborations. Sometimes that can be really difficult. We also have Bren Tooley from our Meyer Fellowship Office and Stacy Gardner from our Research Compliance and Integrity Office, and Michelle Quick from our Sponsored Program Office, who will provide their expertise and insights and what you can do right now to set yourself up for success. I stole that from their Sprout description. As Thomas Edison once said, good fortune is what happens when opportunity meets planning. So thank you very much for your time and their expertise. Bren?
Thank you so much. We're excited together and to see so many people interested in international research collaborations. We're here to just provide a quick overview of how to go about doing this and then some of the resources that you have. We love to work with you, and we are here precisely to help you do what you want to do that benefits your research agenda and your teaching and your life. So I'm not going to take too much time, just two things. We'll certainly have a Q&A at the end. If you have questions along the way, though, several of us can be monitoring the chat. I don't promise to do too many different things. I can handle Zoom, but if I'm juggling too much, I mess up. So just let me know if somehow the screen slips away or what have you. But we can certainly answer your questions now or later. We'll start off with Rachel Powers. Please note that I am recording, we are recording this, and I'm going to share my screen and let's hope it works. 1 second as we move everything over to Rachel.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Rachel Powers and I'm in the chemistry department here at Grand Valley. I'm in just finished up my 16th year here. And so once we get to my talk, right, I'll tell you a little bit about two international collaborations that I participate in here at GVSU. And hopefully some of the things that'll emerge from the talk and me telling you about these collaborations is just kind of the possibilities that are out there for you as well. And, you know, afterwards, I'm happy to take any questions you might have. So when I joined the faculty here at GVSU back in the day, I had two great collaborators in my own department, Brad Waller and Dave Leonard. And so the three of us really started a collaboration. We're all biochemists and we're all interested in protein structure function. And so the three of us kind of worked together. We all had sort of individual specialties, expertise, and, you know, but yet we worked on a common project. So Bren. Yeah, so the first step in my international collaboration is kind of all about who you know. So I began a collaboration with Robert Bonomo at Case Western Reserve University, who collaborated with Amelia Caselli and Fabio Prati at the University of Modena. And so I'll tell you a little bit about how this grew out. But Bob, I knew from graduate school, and because I knew him, he ran a hospital and was interested in similar things that I am. So I've known him for an awful long time. And, you know, Amelia collaborated with Bob. So the collaborator of my collaborator is also my collaborator, I think. So that's how it all kind of worked out. And again, it sort of expanded our areas of expertise. So whereas Brad, Dave, and I are interested in protein structure function, Bob is a medical doctor. And so he runs the VA hospital and he is very much interested in clinical aspects of things. And then Amelia and Fabio at the University of Modena in Italy, they are synthetic organic chemists. So all of these people have different areas of expertise that complement our areas of expertise and really kind of expand the problems that we can approach. And it really is at quite a different level of research. So it really worked out. Bren? So it is a little bit about who you know, and the fact is it ends up being a small world after all. So the world of, and I'll be a little bit more specific here, we work on antibiotic resistance, but very specifically we work on beta-lactamase enzymes that destroy antibiotics. And so all of these people on the screen here all work on very similar things. So Bren? Dave actually did a sabbatical in Bob Bonomo's lab before I joined GVSU. Small world. He was looking to kind of change his research interests and worked with Bob in for a year or for half a year on his sabbatical. And then Amelia and I went to graduate school together. So we were in, or at least I was in graduate school at Northwestern, and Amelia came from Italy to visit for about 2 years. And she and I have published several papers together. So it all kind of came back with it being a very small world. However, what we ended up doing all together is this whole huge international collaboration. We wrote an NIH R01 grant together. And again, part of the positive reviews of this grant were the project and its significance, of course, but another very positive thing was just the assembly of this entire team who were uniquely qualified to complete and to do this project. So it really was the team, and we assembled a really great team to approach our project. The NIH R01 subaward, that's the GVSU component. The R01 itself and the principal investigator of it is Bob Bonomo here in the center. And one of the advantages of being on a subaward, I'm just going to say, is that their group handles a lot of the annual reports for us and does a lot of the grant management for us that in the past we had to do, or in the past I had to do individually, which takes a lot of time and energy. And so they have a team of people in his lab that handles a lot of the grant aspects of things, which helps us a lot and allows us to really shine in that, you know, we can mentor undergraduate students in our lab. We have the time and the ability now and the money to do that. And so it really is a very synergistic combination of people. And it shows our students how really research can be conducted on an international level, involving all sorts of research groups. You can't study everything, but you can find people that can help you tackle a particular problem. So that's one international collaboration. We've been able to maintain this collaboration even before the pandemic, but even now it's honestly gotten a little bit better to maintain this collaboration through the use of Zoom. So we actually Zoom about once a month. Our entire team can get together and you know, we access files through a shared Dropbox directory, and we can share files that way. And it's been kind of all those technological things that, you know, many people, you know, don't like Zoom for classes and stuff, but for meetings and for keeping in touch with all your collaborators, it works out really well. All right, I think next slide then. So my second international collaboration, so this tale is a little bit more recent, and it's a recent collaboration and the story's a little bit different. So in 2020, I was approved for a sabbatical, and I knew that was coming up. And so I had to start thinking about what I was going to do. So one of the things I considered, and Brent, I'm sure can tell you more about this, is that I considered a Fulbright. And I had gone to a workshop on campus and looked into Fulbrights and started exploring that as an option. So the one thing that I took away from that Fulbright workshop that GVSU did was to find a good match, like not worry so much about what country do you want to go to, or, but it was to find a very good match, and that even if they only had, you know, one opportunity in that country, if it was a good match, then you were very competitive for it. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to go out and find something that's a good match for that sabbatical. Next one. So how do I find an international host and collaborator? And I went about doing it kind of just on the internet, right? So go ahead, Bren. So I looked in the literature and I found this paper One of the things I wanted to do was establish a new collaboration, but I also I did want to travel a little bit. That's why I was considering the Fulbright, but I also really like beta-lactamases. And so I started looking through the literature and I came up with this paper. And it's a different type of beta-lactamase. I was really intrigued that this was a beta-lactamase that was found out in the Alaskan soil. So this is kind of very different from the beta-lactamases I study that are found in the hospital, in the clinics. These are ones that are out in nature. And then I started looking at the names on the paper because, maybe those would be potential hosts and collaborators. And of course, you can see the last name right there is Pablo Power. And I thought, well, how appropriate. Rachel Powers, Power empowers. Maybe that would be a great collaboration. We have almost the same last name. And so, what did I do? Go ahead, Bren. Well, okay, I did the literature search. I remembered from many, many years ago that I had seen Pablo Power. I did not know Pablo, but I had seen him give a talk at a conference. And so if you click on it, it was back in 2015. I had gone to this conference in San Diego and I had seen Pablo give a talk, and it was not on this project, but something similar. And I thought, wow, this is a really cool project that he's working on. So what did I do? I didn't know him. I just emailed him. And so out of the blue, I sent him an email. I said, hey, I'm thinking about a Fulbright. Is this something, could you be my host? Some Fulbrights require you to have kind of approval from your host in advance. And this one in Argentina did. And so Pablo responded within like a day and said, yeah, this would be really awesome. I'd love to, let's talk about it. And so this was in 2019 is when I submitted the Fulbright grant. And like I said, I reached out to him and he told me about this really cool program called Zoom that we could actually meet face-to-face on. So this was before everyone did Zoom. And so I had to figure that out early. So go ahead to the next one. Okay, so coming back to this, go ahead. Pablo and actually Gabriel Gutkind is also kind of one of the other scientists in the lab. He and I and Pablo got together at the University of Buenos Aires, and we were going to do a project together. We applied for a Fulbright, and go ahead. We got it, right? So my goal was to establish a new international collaboration and also just kind of give myself a new aspect to my research. And I was awarded the Fulbright. And so I submitted it in 2019. I found out, no, I take that back. I submitted in 2018. I think I found out in 2019. And then I traveled in February of 2020. I got on a plane and flew down to Argentina, to Buenos Aires on a huge flight. And arrived there in February of 2020. And as you probably know, what happened, go ahead, Brent. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. So the pandemic happened, of course. And so within a month, I had turned around and home. I was kicked out of the country, said to go home, and everything closed down. So when I got home, Pablo and I really wanted to continue our collaboration. And right before actually I was sent home, I had gotten in from the National Institutes of Health, and there was an R01 grant called an IRID, which was International Research in Infectious Diseases, which I thought that sounds perfect. Sounds like what we want to do. And so Pablo and I, along with, again, Bob Bonomo, he came into the picture. Again, Bob Bonomo's everywhere. He collaborated already on a different project with Pablo. And so now we have this new collaboration between the three of us. We've applied to this NHR1 grant. And again, it has to be housed, interestingly, in Argentina. So for us, communication has been key to keeping this collaboration going during the pandemic. But with Michelle Quick's help, in the midst of the pandemic, Pablo and I submitted this R01 grant to the NIH, which involved lots of communication on Zoom. And for Pablo, it was even more challenging. He didn't really have a grants office that he could turn to. They don't have any, or at least they had very few. And if they do have R01 grants, they're few and far between. So I don't think they've had one in, I don't know, Michelle can correct me, but a long, long time. So this was a whole new thing that Pablo was handling with Michelle's help in the middle of the pandemic to try and get people to help submit this grant. So again, my big take home message, communication is key. Budget in extra time and really just go for it. Reach out, send out an email to people that seem interesting, and those common interests can really go a long ways to opening doors and creating these incredible opportunities. I think maybe I have one more, but I don't know. Nope, I guess I don't. So that was it. So those were my take-home messages. And I'm happy to take questions later.
Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Richard Lord, also from chemistry.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'd also like to just put out there that I'm also the current chair of the Research and Development Committee. And so during the Q&A later, if you have questions about how you might fund some of your international research, feel free to ask me questions about that. So I have 3 quick stories here. I don't have nearly as cool graphics as Rachel, so I apologize, about kind of how I got into international research. And I think it's going to echo a lot of the things that Rachel has already shared with you. So for those of you who don't know me, I grew up in Southern Indiana. I grew up in a tiny town, 95% white. I thought that going to Taco Bell was international. Went to a small regional college that was 85% white. So that was really moving up there in the world. And my advisor knew that I needed to get out there and actually experience some new stuff, and encouraged me to pursue these research programs at a major R1 institution. I applied to a bunch of places, but Northwestern University in particular. And that was, there was a group there that was doing very similar type of chemistry to what I was doing back at my home institution. And so I had just reached out and emailed one of the professors and said, I'd really like to come and do this work in your lab. Would you mind if I stop by during my spring break? Looking back on it, I'm a little surprised that he actually responded to an undergraduate's email from another institution, but I was very lucky that he did. Drove up to Chicago, got to spend an afternoons touring his lab. Long story short, they lost my application and he was actually rather upset by that. And so he was able to pay me off of a grant to come up to Evanston anyway. And this really does echo what Rachel said, you know, put yourself out there. I know it can be a little bit scary, but even if you don't have a connection already, because you never know when there will be common interest and you may be able to form a new relationship. And that was really where I got exposed to real international culture. I worked in a team where I think there were, on my sub part of the program, there were about 10 of us. So there were 2 Canadians, a couple of Russians, a Pakistani woman, a South Korean woman, a handful of folks from China. I mean, it was a really diverse group, and I've stayed in touch with many of those people up to this day. We don't have any active collaborations going on there, but if I ever need to have a connection in any one of those countries, I have someone on the ground who I could reach out to potentially put me in contact with someone if they don't respond to my email, as I was fortunate to have happen. Bren, if you could go ahead and click forward. So the 2 international collaborations that I do have going are going to be the core of my next 2 stories. The first one is related to my sabbatical that I took a couple of years ago. And while I was on this sabbatical, or actually shortly before that, I was talking to one of my lab mates from graduate school and explaining to him some of the stuff that I was going to be working on down there. And he asked me, you know, do you know Achintya? And I said, no, should I know who this person is? It turns out that they actually roomed together in a dorm when they were undergrads back in India, and he was working on effectively the exact same type of things that we were looking to develop in this sabbatical that I was doing with Andres Cisneros down at the University of North Texas. And by kind of sheer luck, we were able to bring in an expert on the one software package that we did not understand between the 2 of us. And while things have been derailed by COVID and we aren't as far along in that project as I would like, we are still actively collaborating between IIT Bombay. Andres has now moved on to one of the UT schools, and here at Grand Valley to develop that package that would be able to help people model their chemistry across the world. Go ahead, Bren. And then the final one, and the one that's actually actively being funded, is leverage your collaborators. And this is, again, something that I think Rachel has already brought up to a certain extent. prior to my coming to Grand Valley, now almost a decade ago, I was a postdoc at Wayne State University. And my second year there, we had a new inorganic chemist come in. He was explaining to my postdoctoral advisor that there are some things that he would really like to study with computations, and he didn't really feel comfortable doing it himself. And my advisor looked at him and said, you know, if I collaborate with you on this, it's basically going to guarantee that you cannot get tenure on this project, because it's going to be a question of whether or not the things came from you, or the ideas came from you, or whether they came from me. And so what he said was, is if you're comfortable with it, instead, why don't you work with my postdoc, because he's getting ready to go off to a position at PUI. And because of the way that they view the tenure process here, basically he won't count against you if you collaborate with him. And so again, a little bit of fortunate timing. Stas and I, Stas had a background coming from Israel, but had done most of his schooling here in the US. And so we started up a collaboration that was has been very fruitful and has involved a number of international collaborators, primarily through graduate students and postdocs over there at Wayne State University. But as we were going along, we had this new project where my collaborator Stas is really an expert at developing catalysts. I'm an expert at modeling them. But similar to what Rachel said, we needed somebody who was a little bit better at making some of the chemicals, because that wasn't really our expertise. And so I had found some papers that it turns out was again another old classmate of his from back in Israel. And so we started talking about whether we could potentially reach out, and we started looking for unique funding opportunities. And it turns out that there is, I'll have you go ahead and click one more time, Bren. There is actually a NSFBSF collaboration where there is a unique pot of money between the United States and Israel that is only available if you have somebody on both sides of the collaboration. So through this connection that Stas had, we had somebody on the ground in Israel, we had two collaborators in the United States. And so instead of going for pots of money that people literally all over the world are going for, this greatly cuts down on the number of people who are potentially going for that. We were unsuccessful in our first attempt, but we were successful in 2020. And so we now have a really cool opportunity to support students, supplies, and as part of it, there is mandatory travel back and forth between the United States and Israel. And so in hindsight, across all of these, I think, you have networks, whether you realize them or not, from past international collaborators. Make sure that you keep up with those, and occasionally dropping buddies from graduate school, or perhaps a time as a postdoc, a note can really open up new doors. Don't be afraid to just send people random emails as well. And look into your collaborators and see what their backgrounds are. They may be able to put you in touch with people that can make things happen.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing now so that Jeff can take over the helm.
Okay, no, thank you, Bren, and thank you very much for facilitating, and to Stacy for organizing, Rachel and Richard for your comments, and always happy to see friends and colleagues and leaders in our community like Peter and Brian and Ed and Bob and everybody for being here. What I was hoping to do was to build off of Rachel and Richard's comments by first sharing kind of a framework of the process that I try and use in international collaborations, and then share a couple different examples which hopefully will illustrate the part of the process. And some of these comments I think will be echoing some of the things that Rachel and Richard have already said. But the first one is to canvas within your own resources. So Richard, you had some really good examples there, but even if you did an overseas study in college, if you did some overseas work in graduate school, even sometimes going back to high school, that sort of taking stock of all the different connections you might have internationally before you get started, and then going into thinking from there within Grand Valley. And fortunately, within Grand Valley, there are a ton of resources. So some of them are a little bit more directly obvious. So like the Padnos International Center, we as an institution have institutional partnerships with universities in 30 different countries. So that's like just a tremendous set of resources right there. Bob, of course, and leading us with the CSCE. FTLC has some exciting opportunities. And of course, I know we'll hear later about Office of Sponsored Programs and Stacy's really important work with the ORCI. And then there's also groups like International Friends and Faculty. So there's just a ton internally that you can tap into. But within the, I would also encourage you to think sometimes there can be slightly surprising places or in addition to the more obvious candidates. So for example, within our unit, Peter, who's on the call now, Peter has done a fantastic job leading international trips of students. And so has a whole host of relationships going to England and Great Britain, that can be then a resource. That's just an example within our unit, but that can be a resource as well. Ed is our leader with the Big Data Advisory Group. And so in 2018, he put out an opportunity to go internationally through the support of Grand Valley to a big data digital humanities conference in Leipzig, Germany. So I put in for that, was fortunate to have that happen. So kind of thinking internally within Grand Valley among some of the less initially obvious areas. And then outside of Grand Valley, I really want to give a shout out to Bren, because Bren is just a fantastic resource. I know there's Fulbright, but also she is connected with many other international fellowship opportunities. And Bren came in and spoke to a number of my classes this past semester, and so brings in both the faculty and the students. And so I think that can be really exciting if you can get collaboration going involving students as well. So from there, I would just say, and again, this resonates with some of the points that Rachel and Richard made, but I would start small. I would experiment, fail, try and weave things together and have fun. So in terms of starting small, I find that kind of building incremental partnerships tends to work a little bit better just because each group has their own workflow and culture and so on. So I think that can be a good, just kind of start incrementally, build trust, build understanding of how each side works. When I say experiment, I think that it can be very helpful to do in discipline work, especially if you're in a very sort of disciplined, content-rich area. I'm in journalism, so there's sometimes a little bit more flexibility to experiment both within journalism, but then also being in a more applied discipline. There can be a chance to kind of experiment around how you actually tell the story. So for me, this can mean both going into areas like this nonprofit that I'll share in a minute. We have a whole space that we're developing in the metaverse and a way of telling stories in the metaverse. It also can mean going into more peer-reviewed scholarship, which for me is a little different than what I usually do. Fail, I would just really emphasize the point that Richard was speaking to about you go for funding one time, it doesn't work out, just ask for feedback, see what you can do, apply again. I first started applying for a Fulbright. I had done one as a teacher in 1995, but I applied for the first time as a scholar in 2000, and then applied 4 different times over the course of 13 years before it actually worked out. And so, you know, it's disappointing and so on when it doesn't happen. But on the other hand, I think it is possible to learn from those things and just not get discouraged and keep growing. And then the weave together, I think if it's possible to not think of your international collaboration work out here, and then the rest of your work with service and scholarship and teaching in here, but more try and bring them together, I think that can be helpful. And of course, you know, it's very enriching to meet and learn from colleagues, particularly in journalism. I know there's been a lot of talk within the past 5 years, at least, of kind of the challenges of you know, the label of fake news and attack on journalists. And many colleagues in other countries were already operating under very, very dangerous and adversarial conditions before the rhetoric of fake news came in, before the pandemic came in. And so for me, it's very humbling and inspiring to work with and learn from those people. So I just wanted to share a couple projects that hopefully will be illustrative of that. So let me just go to the correct, there we go. Here's one that I'll call up. Let me just go here. Okay. So we'll go, pardon me, here we go. So I am currently the civil discourse professor, Padnos Sarosic, endowed professor of civil discourse. That my term is going to be coming to an end. So if that is an experience that people might be interested in, I'd be happy to chat with you about that opportunity experience. But while preparing for that professorship, where I'm looking at kind of misinformation and people trying to get accurate information out and other people trying to misinform, while looking at what that tension means for civil discourse, I noticed that there was the same kinds of things happening all over the world, but there was no real consistent place or kind of standard framework globally for folks to understand, like what's happening in the United States and how that relates to or is similar and different from Algeria to Brazil to Kazakhstan and so on. So with the students in civil discourse and in computer science, we kind of conceived and then carried out the global civil discourse map. So I'll just click on a specific country. So you see here what we did with the civil discourse students is that we identified a number of different variables globally that on the one hand illustrated the promise of free speech, and on the other hand, the realities of what's happening on the ground. And so I share this in terms of the weaving together. So I chose Benin in particular because of a very brave journalist named Inias Sossu, with whom we had done some work. And he was jailed for tweeting accurately the comments. Here he is, Inias, tweeting accurately the comments that a public prosecutor made at a meeting. And so they went to his house. They basically said, you better take this down. He refused. So they took him on Christmas Day from his family, wife, 3 kids, young baby, 2-hour trial, in prison for 18 months. And so what we did this past semester is I got support through the FTLC to work with colleagues in French and then in Spanish here at Grand Valley. So their students interviewed French and Spanish speaking journalists about what it's like to work and live around misinformation in their countries. So the computer science students will then embed those edited interviews with the multimedia journalism students did on, here it is, included interviews on the country level profile. So it's basically weaving together the work as Padnos Sarosic professorship, the work that I've done with international investigative journalism, teaching, and collaboration internationally, and then internally to Grand Valley with colleagues. So that's one example. It's kind of, again, like one of my more enjoyed parts of this is, here is the kind of tradition that we're building with this project. So here's the civil discourse students in 2020, the computer science students, their pictures in there. Then we had more computer science students 2021, civil discourse 2021. For those students, then we'll add in the French and Spanish language students. So we're sort of together iteratively over time building this distinctive resource that hopefully can be an international resource for thinking globally about these issues. So that's one. The other one I just wanted to mention briefly, and I want to be mindful of time, is the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism. So this is a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2019. I consulted with Bob Smart before doing that. And we basically bring together investigative reporters, visual journalists, and data scientists from around the world to carry out ongoing investigations into key global issues. So you may remember when Maria Chimatile was the provost, she had this ongoing project on water issues around the world. So coincidentally, one of our really big projects, which is ongoing, is a global investigation into access to clean water. So we've published stories around this issue in about 14 different countries, all based on the framework of there's this international standard from the United Nations saying that everybody should have access to clean water, but yet close to 1 billion people do not. So just before this call, I was on the phone with the gentleman who runs this organization that we collaborated with, Humangle, who does all kinds of security work. And they did this very powerful story with our team about, you can see here's a herder and the conflict, the violent conflict that's happening from the increased desertification caused by climate change, and then the lack of government response to it. They've allocated resources, but it's been going in different areas and so on. So this is just one example. The other major investigation that we've done has been around the global lottery industry. And so I won't go too deep into it other than to say that we started with that project. We worked with colleagues in the United States. Grand Valley students have presented virtually at conferences in Eastern Europe, and that this initial project became the basis for what's become an organization. So I'll stop there because I want to be mindful of colleagues' time and also leave time for Q&A, but I hope that illustrates kind of the framework and then just a couple examples of projects that are ongoing with colleagues around the world that apply and kind of incorporate the ideas on that framework. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. These are all inspiring examples, really inspiring. And I have no doubt that the colleagues who have presented would be willing to be resources for those of you who would like to go into greater depth about their particular strategies for engagement and outreach, how you get started, how you pursue funding, how you continue. It's inspiring. What I'd like to turn to now is really to follow up on another of Jeff's points, that there are resources here at Grand Valley to help you succeed in the work that you want to do. And I'd like to turn first to my colleague, Michelle Quick. And I also need to share my screen. And so let me do that, Michelle, as you prepare. There's Jeff. Yay, it worked, I think.
Yes, it did. I see it. I will be very brief here. I only have a few minutes, but I just want to let everybody know that the Office of Sponsored Programs is here to provide support for any grant proposal preparations for awards that will come into the institution. And like Rachel had mentioned, being a sub-award, our team helps with you gathering the right documents, providing templates and resources to use to build your budgets. And we will help interpret instructions and just make sure that you're getting everything together that you need to. I do want to share that you can see on the screen, there's a find funding highlighted section. If you go to the OSP website, you can click on that link and you'll find access to different funding search tools like grants.gov, and NSF has one, but we are also introducing a tool called Pivot at Grand Valley. And there's a lot of information about Pivot. If you go to our website, there's tutorials on how to create your profile and how to access your profile and all of that. But in following up with some of the things that you've talked about, collaborators are so important. Obviously, we are here in the United States, and I'm noticing a pattern in the external funding opportunities coming out that federal agencies are realizing this, that it's important for us to be collaborating internationally. And while it used to be a scary thing to do, I do think the government is supporting it more and more, and even requiring it on some of their opportunity announcements. So it's important to be able to find those collaborators, and Pivot is also a tool that can help us do that. Pivot is international, and opportunities are in there and they're updated continuously. But one of the things, and I haven't had time to get into practicing with this, but you can search for collaborators on using the tool. you can look at their key terms and search terms. You can see what grant awards they have had. You can get information on how to contact them and look for those people and start to form collaborations. And I do think it is, if it's a big step to, go right for an NIH grant or an NSF grant, that finding a collaborator that you can be a subaward on is a really good way to get into this. So I don't want to take up much more of your time, but there is a contact email for our department. If you have any questions, just reach out to that email address and it will get turfed to the right person, depending on where you're at and who has your portfolio. But we are excited to help. And I love hearing the stories about everything that everybody's doing. So thanks for the presentations.
I'll be quick just to say that I set up a pivot account myself. It's really simple. It's 10
Yes.
minutes and it's well worth it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle.
Mhm.
So I'm the institutional point of contact for Fulbright and, for that matters, other fellowships, not grants, which would be with the OSP office. So if you're providing a budget and if there's an institutional thumbprint on what you're doing, that's a grant. If you are applying for something that is in a way already structured for you, and the budget is basically given and it's going to follow you even if you leave GV, which please don't, that's a fellowship. Right. There's a bit of a gray area in there, but my colleagues in OSP and I will support you together, and we can help you sort out what's a fellowship and what's a grant, if that is ever of issue. So there are two programs that I'd really like to draw your attention to, and I'm aware of time, so I'm going to go really fast. But the Fulbright Scholar Program is the flagship exchange and educational program of the State Department of the United States government, and it is a fabulous opportunity for you. Grand Valley has a track record of success with Fulbright Scholar Awards. We're third in the nation this year, tied with a few other fine institutions, but we are third in the nation. And I anticipate that we'll retain that position in the coming year as well. Fulbright Scholar opportunities may concentrate on research or on teaching or on a combination of the two things. Many will require a host institution letter, not all do, but most do. And they can be for a semester or for a full year. And so there are many different permutations. I'd be happy to look at the website with you. It's very informative. There's a database of past scholars on the Fulbright Scholar website, and on our CSCE Faculty Fellowships website, there is a record of Grand Valley Fulbright Award winners and a sample of application forms. That's password protected, but people have generously provided some samples of applications that have received the award. Grand Valley also does fabulously with the Fulbright Specialist Program, which is another State Department program. It's less well known, and I wish it weren't, and it's amazing. It's for shorter length periods of service. And basically what you do is put your name on a roster, you hang out your shingle, so to speak, and can then go to several different locations who seek your expertise, who want to collaborate with you. It's a wonderful program. It has multiple deadlines each year. So there's more flexibility in several different ways with the specialist program. It is State Department as well. It's administered, however, not by IIE, but by World Learning, which is another State Department affiliated NGO. For the Scholar Program, it's open right now. Let's talk. There's no required institutional thumbprint on the Scholar Program, so you don't have to check in with me. There's no required element from Grand Valley. Of course, you should talk with your unit head or department chair about the leave. Bob with the Center for Scholarly and Creative Excellence can also help channel queries you might have about funding and release time. Richard Lord is a wonderful resource if you're pairing an application with a sabbatical. So again, there's a lot of us here. The deadline for the Scholar Program applications is September 15th, and that's a recurring deadline. And then you wait. So there's a review that happens within the United States. You'll find out if you're a semifinalist. There's a second review that happens in country, and then sometime between January and May, and yes, it can get really frustrating, you'll be notified of your final selection status. I think I'll jump through some of this because time is pressing, but this is directly from the Fulbright Scholar Program. They are very forthcoming. They don't want any part of this to be unclear. So the review criteria is right there. That's our website on CSCE. There are links. This is just the top of the first page. I also am delighted to work with people on their NEH proposals. There are many more. This is a screenshot, but if I were to scroll down this page, I have other links there, and I would be delighted to explore those with you as well. That said, I'd like to turn this back over to the person who has really kept us all organized and made sure that this was going to happen, my colleague Stacy.
Great, thanks, Bren. So my name is Stacy Gardner. I am the Research Compliance Specialist in the Office of Research Compliance and Integrity. Ben Vesper and I comprise the entire office, and we support all of the areas in the honeycomb on the screen. So the two of us are very busy with these different areas, but our main goal is to help you be successful in your scholarship and research activities. And we do that by hopefully providing services to you that let you know maybe when you're doing something that goes outside of the normal bounds, things that might not be compliant. We can highlight those things for you in our different review services and the committees that we support. So if you may be traveling internationally to do research with human subjects, maybe it's education research or interviews, surveys, things like that, you would need IRB review before you begin those activities. So if you need help getting started on that, if it's a new thing for you here at Grand Valley, please contact our office. I'm happy to meet with you in whatever modality works best to talk about how to get started and some of the tips that might be useful to you to have a successful IRB application. The same goes for IACUC review, and if you're going to be doing research or education with animals that have a spine, we can provide support to you on what that review process looks like and what kind of approvals you need before you can begin that activity. But I think that probably one of the most important things related to international activities is export controls. So for that, what we're looking at is what kind of items or technologies will you be taking to another country? And is that item controlled? So what that means is the federal government, they don't want things that are important to national security to get out to some other countries or world leaders that could then be used against us. One of the things that comes up often with this, and you might be surprised, but it's Pulse Secure, the encryption that's used here at Grand Valley to access, Blackboard and other things by VPN. That encryption technology can be controlled depending on what country you're going to. So before you leave, as soon as you know where you're going, if you want to just contact our office, we can talk about what you plan to bring with you, what kind of technology you'll be bringing, and we can do an assessment to determine if you need any kind of export control license from the government, or if there's other letters that we can provide to you to have a little bit of a smoother ride going through customs and coming back to the US or when you leave the US. So those are different things that we can do to help you be successful and not get lost in all of the different rules and regulations that you'll need to follow. So at this point in time, I think that we can take any questions that you have, as we've all kind of really unloaded a lot of information on you. Is there something that we can answer for you, or any other help that we can give you?
I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm also going to stop recording so that we have a chance to just do a very open Q&A.